Ethan tied the knot with me, a silent one, just for the cash. I know he can't stand me. And honestly, I don't either. In my head, I curse his dad, curse his mom, curse his first girl, and curse Ethan himself. But what I didn't realize was that he can read minds. Every silent word I think, he catches loud and clear. Later on, he heard me think, Ethan, I'm done for. You're finally free. I don't know when Ethan started mind reading. The first sign something was weird was when I was furiously cursing his first girl right in front of him. Oh, Ethan, darling Ethan, stop acting so sweet. You're not a kid anymore. What's with this act? She knows I can't speak. Yet you still make me explain myself. Explain what exactly? Ethan suddenly turned around. His brows furrowed as he scanned me from head to toe. The way he looked at me sent shivers down my spine. I signed to him, "What's up?" Ethan's voice was cold. Got a problem with Mia? I was taken aback. I had just cursed Mia in my mind, and here he was questioning me? But I could only play dumb, tilting my head and flashing him a blank, innocent smile. Ethan gave a dismissive laugh and went back to chatting with Mia. His voice was gentle, soft, perfectly warm. I kept smiling outwardly while inside I was thinking, idiot. When the event wrapped up, Mia's unwillingness to leave Ethan was obvious. Ethan's parents were there too. Seeing them cozy with each other didn't faze them at all. In fact, Ethan's mom even pulled me aside with a grin. Jess, let those guys handle their stuff. Let's chill in the car. I smiled and nodded. In my mind, like mother, like son. No wonder a shameless son has a shameless mom. Ethan. I noticed his face darken, but I thought it was just because I was walking slow. Little did I know it was because he was reading my mind. As I waved to him, I threw in another thought. The guy's dad is just as bad. I waited in the car with his mom for over half an hour. Finally, Ethan and his dad strolled over. He turned to his mom. Selena and I are heading back home. What? His mom looked surprised and was about to ask when his dad gave her a look that said it all. She got it and smiled knowingly. All right. You two go home and get some rest. As soon as I stepped out, their car zoomed away. Ethan just stood there, not showing any signs of wanting to go home. I looked at him puzzled. Ethan? So it's not just Mia. You have a beef with my folks too? How could he know every time I curse someone in my head? I stared at Ethan, even more confused. But Ethan didn't tell me he could read minds. He just coldly warned, don't give Mia a hard time. She's already heartbroken from our breakup. Heartbroken? She cried for like 2 minutes. Then, with a sad look, she told Ethan, even if you marry someone else, I'll always wait for you. On my wedding day, she showed up too, even wearing a wedding dress. She didn't actually come in though. She just took a pic outside and posted it online wearing my dress. Standing where you are, doesn't that make me your bride too? That post is still pinned at the top of her profile. To her, it's her deepest love for Ethan. To me, it's the ultimate insult. For that alone, I'd be justified in giving her a hard time. But Ethan came to warn me on her behalf. Inwardly, I let out a cold laugh and boldly let my thoughts spill out. If you're so in love, why don't you have the guts to divorce me? If it weren't to ease my mom's worries, I'd never have married you. With your dumb look, how dare you disdain me for being silent? You may have a mouth, but I've got thoughts. How dare you disdain me for being silent? You may have a mouth, but I've yet to hear you say anything worthwhile. Selena, Ethan snapped, gritting his teeth as he called my name, startled out of my rant. I looked at him silently asking, what? Ethan, you called me an idiot? Though everything I said was true, it's embarrassing to get caught. I signed to Ethan. How do you know I insulted you? Ethan, not wanting to reveal his mind-reading ability, came up with a lame excuse. Your face says it all. Apparently, my expression was enough to convey every curse. Puzzled, I touched my face, incredulous that I'd somehow lost control over my expressions. Then, I plastered on a sincere smile and signed, I didn't insult you. Ethan closed his eyes, clearly frustrated and pretending to be innocent. I turned and walked to the car alone. but my mood felt as heavy as an endless dark night, where no hint of dawn could be seen. The reason Ethan and I married was partly because my mom was seriously ill, and partly because the Reynolds family's finances had tanked. I'd always known Ethan married me for money. He hated that I was silent. Luckily, I didn't like him either. In the year or so we've lived together, every bit of kindness and consideration I've shown has been fake. The doctor said my mom doesn't have much time left, maybe 3 months for her final days. I don't want her to worry about anything, even though I hate Ethan and have wanted a divorce for a long time. I can endure it for my mom's sake. Yet fate seems against me. I was diagnosed with cancer. The doctor who had been treating my mom was more devastated than I was. Jess, you're so young. How could this happen? I was heartbroken too, but alongside the sadness, there was a sense of relief. If I die, I can be with my mom again. Maybe that's not so bad. I stayed at the hospital that night. Late into the evening, I got a call from an unknown number. It was a friend of Ethan's saying, "Sis-in-law, Ethan's drunk. Can you come pick him up?" Someone nearby quickly reminded him, "You idiot, sis-in-law is mute. She can't talk, so how can she answer you?" "Oh, right." His voice turned awkward. "Sorry, sis-in-law, if you can come pick him up, could you text me?" I hadn't planned to go, but maybe because my time was running out, I did. Longer press desires surged. I wanted to finalize a divorce with Ethan ASAP. He'd probably agree. The divorce cooling off period is only a month. It's short, but it's precious time to me. I want a clean break before I die. I don't want to be tied to the Reynolds family even in death, so I went to pick Ethan up and bring him home. He was thoroughly drunk, sprawled on the couch. In the past, I'd have made him some sobering soup, helped him change, and guided him to bed. But tonight, I just sat quietly beside him, waiting for him to wake up so I could ask for a divorce right away. Ethan was spoiled from a young age, and after we married, I took care of him pretty well. Lying on the couch for a bit, he started feeling uncomfortable and sat up with a frown. I stared at him intently. My gaze must have been so cold that it snapped him out of his drunken stupor. "Why are you staring at me like that?" he asked, irritated. I signed to him, "Let's get a divorce." Ethan couldn't understand. In the year we'd lived together, he'd made little effort to understand me, more complex or less common signs. He was clueless because he'd never cared to learn. Inwardly, I sneered. "Talking to an idiot is exhausting." "Ethan." I switched to my phone, typed a line, and showed it to him. Still a bit drunk, he stared at the words, "Get a divorce," in confusion. Divorce? Who's divorcing whom? I pointed to him, then to myself. This time he finally understood, but couldn't believe that I, a mute, dared to bring up divorce, especially since I had no one backing me. My father had passed away years ago, and my mother was now bedridden with illness. Our relatives had once tried to snatch our family's assets, and my mom was now bedridden. After they failed, they'd resented us ever since. Except for my mom. No one really cared if I lived or died. So Ethan couldn't understand why someone like me would have the nerve to ask for a divorce. He chuckled in disbelief. "You don't actually think you'd have men lining up for you if you divorced me, do you?" I shook my head, keeping my gaze firm. This only frustrated him more. "Fine. If you want a divorce, I agree. But everything we agreed on before stays the same, and your family's investment won't be refunded." I nodded. I considered it payment for my mother's happiness this past year, a costly deal, but what's done is done, and there was no reason to demand it back. Ethan looked at me with utter confusion, even slowing his speech. "Jess, why are you suddenly asking for a divorce?" It was a question he should have asked first if he'd had even the slightest affection for me, but since he didn't, he expressed anger first, then asked why. I didn't answer, just gave him a small smile. As I stood, Ethan suddenly grabbed my wrist, repeating, "Why do you suddenly want a divorce? The financial loss is substantial. Without a reason, the sudden demand is baffling." He was probably too used to being adored and couldn't handle being dumped by a mute woman. But if he thought about it, he should be happy. Once we're divorced, he could be with Mia openly. A wedding, a title, everything Mia wanted. He could finally give her that. How wonderful for him. I still remember when the Reynolds family first proposed marriage. I had considered living a peaceful life with Ethan, Even without love, a harmonious, steady life would have been enough. People only saw our wealth now, but few knew how close my mom and I had come to being harmed after my father's passing, and it was then that I lost my voice. My mother was always worried no one would want me, and even more worried that I'd be mistreated after marriage. So she gave her all to support the Reynolds family, to help Ethan, hoping that I could be just a bit happier in marriage. But on the wedding day, I was thoroughly humiliated. I even asked Ethan if he could talk to Mia about deleting that pinned post. But Ethan said, "What people post is their freedom. Who are you to control it? And what I do or don't do is also my choice. Don't try to control me." That's when I realized Ethan wasn't even worth trying to be polite with. After that, I stopped caring about him. In Ethan's mind, my mere existence was a restriction. But finally, that restriction was about to be lifted. "Ethan, I'm dying. You're finally free." The thought crossed my mind, and Ethan's grip on my wrist loosened. Shock filled his eyes, but I didn't know he'd heard my inner voice. I was just relieved he'd stopped asking why I wanted a divorce, sparing me the need to explain. After all, he didn't love me, didn't care about me. Why would my life or death matter to him? Explaining would only cheapen my dignity. I turned and walked toward the stairs, step by step, heading for the bedroom. With every step, I couldn't help but sigh. What a waste of a handsome face. If only he had a better character. He'd be perfect. And Mia doesn't seem to love him all that much. Otherwise, why let him bear the burden of being branded a cheater? The two of them deserve each other. At least if they're together, they won't drag anyone else down. But still, it's such a pity. I came into this world and never knew what true love felt like. If I'd met someone decent, maybe I'd have experienced it. Ethan isn't worthy. After I went to bed, Ethan went out to meet his friends. One of his childhood buddies, Marcus, noticed his sour expression immediately. On top of that, Ethan still smelled of booze, and his clothes were a mess. Marcus asked, "Did you and Jess have a fight?" Ethan shot him a look, annoyed that he was so spot on, yet also missing the mark. Divorce was far more serious than a fight, and Jess was sick, seriously ill. It seemed Ethan picked up his drink and took a long gulp. Only instead of alcohol, he tasted tea. He remembered then that he and Marcus were drinking tea, not liquor. "When did you stop drinking?" Ethan asked. Marcus replied, "I quit 2 years ago." But 2 years ago, Ethan had quit pretty abruptly. Marcus didn't respond. Ethan continued, "If I remember right, you quit because of Laura, didn't you? She had that much of an impact on you?" Marcus shot him a look of his own. "Since when did tea make you talk so much?" Ethan chuckled softly. After a long silence, Marcus suddenly spoke. "She did have a big impact. When she left, my life felt like it died with her. But she didn't mean much to you while she was around. That's why you should cherish people while they're there. You too, among our group." We ranked ourselves by age. Marcus, the oldest, rarely lectured anyone, especially about relationships. Maybe tonight was different because we were both feeling down, which opened the floodgates. "Ethan, what do you really think about Jess and Mia?" "I haven't felt anything for Mia in a long time. I just felt guilty about the breakup since it was so sudden, and I wanted to make up for it a little." "And Jess?" Ethan pondered for a long time but couldn't find the words. Marcus guessed, "You're used to her." "Grew fond of her over time?" Something like that. It wasn't until tonight when I suddenly demanded a divorce that he realized just how terrifying familiarity could be. In that moment, he pictured coming home after work to an empty house, and the thought filled him with unease. So Marcus advised, "If you're over your ex, don't hurt the person by your side." "Ethan, since when were you so full of life advice?" "Since I know what it's like to lose someone, take it from me. Treat Jess well, or you'll regret it." "Ethan, regret my ass." Marcus gave a cold chuckle. "You better hope you keep that attitude." The next morning, after I got up, I noticed Ethan wasn't home, so I sent him a message. "Where did you go?" He didn't reply. After a while, I heard some noise outside the door. I thought it was Ethan returning. After all, he had agreed to the divorce last night. Today we should go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. But when I opened the door, I saw Mia standing outside instead. She had never been friendly with me without Ethan by her side. She was even more arrogant and mocking. "Let's talk," she said. "Oh, I almost forgot. You're mute," she added, sneering like Ethan. She had a mouth but didn't know how to use it properly. Still, I was curious about what she wanted to talk about and what qualifications she had to speak to me. I stepped aside to let her in. Mia raised an eyebrow in surprise, then sat down on the sofa. I turned to grab paper and a pen, ready to communicate with her. Before I could write, Mia asked, "Aren't you going to offer me a drink? You have guests, don't you? Who does she think she is?" Fortunately, I didn't love Ethan, or she would have been my enemy. I smiled, bowed my head, and wrote, "Let's get straight to the point. Don't waste my time." Mia scoffed coldly. "What? You think that because you married Ethan, you're set for life? You two will get divorced eventually? It was your Ethan who married me and got a short-lived sense of security." I wrote back, "If it weren't for my family's investment, the Reynolds family would have gone bankrupt long ago. Though the Reynolds family has recovered now, they wouldn't dare to kick me out. If I didn't mention the divorce, Ethan would probably continue living with me. Who does Mia think she is?" I looked at her coldly. No words, no threats, just the sharp contrast of our gazes, which said everything. Mia was enraged. She suddenly stood up. "You only have money, but no matter how rich you are, you're still mute." I asked Ethan about it. "You've been married for over a year, and he's never touched you, even if you don't divorce. You'll never have children. Your dad's dead, your mom's dying, and when you die, everything you have will slap." The loud smack echoed through the room. Mia fell back onto the sofa, clutching her face, unable to get up for a while. I hit her hard, my palm tingling. She brought up my family? If she wanted Ethan, I could give him to her. But bringing up my parents and talking about whether I live or die was a different matter. She deserved that slap. After Mia snapped out of it, she started yelling at me. She wanted to hit me but knew Ethan was coming back, so she began to play the victim. Ethan entered just as she was crying out. Seeing the marks of my slap on her face, he immediately turned to me and asked, "Jess, what did you do? Here we go again." This scene had played out so many times before. "What did you do? Here we go again." Sometimes I felt like I was just part of their drama, an accessory to their excitement. But today, I wasn't going to play anymore. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and started playing a recording. It was from the times when Mia and I were alone together. In the recording, she mocked me, insulted me, and cursed me out in the cruelest ways. Mia was stunned. Ethan was too. The recording wasn't even finished when Mia snapped back to reality and tried to grab my phone. "Ethan!" she cried, her voice filled with panic as she tried to explain. "Those weren't my words. She faked the recording. She's slandering me." Ethan closed his eyes and told her coldly, "Leave, Ethan." She pleaded, "Leave. I won't say it a third time." Mia's tears streamed down her face. She was a great actress. If she went into showbiz, she might even win an Oscar. After Mia left, Ethan turned to me, seeing that I was still cold. He spoke softly, "Jess, we need to talk." The same lines as Mia. Now, I hated it even more. I coldly smiled, grabbed the paper and pen again, and wrote, "There's nothing to talk about except the divorce." Ethan hesitated before speaking again. "This morning, I went to the hospital to visit your mom. After a year of marriage, this was the first time he'd gone to visit her alone, and it only happened after I mentioned the divorce. I didn't feel surprised, just disgusted. You agreed to my conditions. Why did you go see my mom?" He sighed. "You haven't told her that you're sick, have you? How did he know I was sick?" I jumped up, my calmness slipping away. Ethan looked at me seriously, then answered, "I can hear what you think. You don't need to write anymore." I froze, so that's why when I cursed his father, his mother, and Mia in my thoughts before, he'd always asked me about it. He had heard every word clearly. "When did you start hearing my thoughts?" "6 months ago, the night you came back from the hospital." He explained, "That night my mom's health had suddenly worsened. The doctor had mentioned a treatment plan with low chances of success. But while I sat by her hospital bed until 2 a.m., Ethan was out drinking with Mia, partying like nothing was wrong. Mia even posted about it on social media, enjoying herself openly while I was in agony, unable to even cry out loud. I hadn't expected Ethan to even cry out loud, but now I finally understood. When I returned home that early morning, he had also just gotten back. He must have noticed my sour expression and muttered something under his breath. I didn't pay attention at the time, thinking he was annoyed with me for not taking care of him while he was drunk. Now, I realized that at that moment, he had actually heard my inner thoughts. Why did you have to make my mom sick? Ethan deserves to be sick, not her. He should die. Ethan was silent for a long moment, then muttered, I always thought you were a petty person. You couldn't stand me being friends with Mia after we broke up. You secretly cursed her in your heart. I didn't know she cursed me too. She had cursed me a lot, and it had been pretty nasty. But neither she nor Ethan had realized I had recorded every single time. At first, I didn't intend to use the recordings against Mia. I just wanted to have something in case I needed it later. But Mia had delivered herself to me on a silver platter. If I didn't use it now, she'd just get more arrogant in the future. I stared coldly at Ethan and asked with my mind, now that you know everything, what are you going to do about it? Ethan pursed his lips, hesitant to speak. He didn't want to talk about Mia, and I didn't push him. Instead, I asked, when are we going to the Civil Affairs Bureau to file for the divorce? Ethan sighed. Jess, you should focus on getting better. What I do or don't do doesn't concern you. This was something he had said to me a long time ago, and now I returned the words to him. Without waiting for his reaction, I stood up and walked out. Behind me, Ethan called out, Selena, where are you going? None of your business, fool. Ethan fell silent. I went to the hospital. The nurse saw me and smiled as she greeted me. Young Master Reynolds came by this morning. I nodded. She noticed I wasn't surprised and quietly asked, are you two okay now? I shook my head, pulling out my phone to show her a message. We're getting a divorce. The nurse was startled, gripping my hand. Did he suggest it? No, I did. I didn't want Ethan, even though others saw him as handsome and capable. He didn't love me. He didn't care for me. So I didn't want him. The nurse saw the determination in my eyes and immediately understood. She asked softly, what will you do now? Dad is long gone, and Mom is about to leave too. I have a serious illness. Even with lots of money, I can't buy a caring person. The nurse seemed more upset than me. Her eyes were red. I lowered my head, unable to look into her eyes. If I did, I'd cry, but my tears made no sound. Silent pain, like a boomerang, flowed out with the tears and stabbed back into my heart. I knew that feeling well. It hurt so much it made me wish I could just die. The nurse said that Ethan had a long talk with my mom that morning. After he left, I saw my mom quietly wiping away a tear. The nurse didn't ask further, afraid of making my mom more upset, but I wanted to know. I texted my mom, what did Ethan say to you this morning? What's there to say? Mom smiled brightly. He said your relationship's warming up and to wait for grandchildren? He won't. Why not? Mom lightly rolled her eyes at me. Didn't you always say Ethan was good to you? That was all a lie. To make the story more believable, I even bought myself gifts, pretending they were from Ethan. In my mom's eyes, Ethan was busy but still good to me. Now I was about to reveal my lies. Mom, Ethan and I are getting a divorce. Mom wasn't shocked, just a bit surprised. She softly asked, did Ethan bully you? He doesn't love me. I see. Mom reached out and hugged me, her calm facade suddenly crumbling. You're such a good girl, Jess. It's his loss that he doesn't love you. You've endured so much for me. Thank you. I shook my head, not feeling the least bit tired. Even though Ethan still clung to Mia after marriage, I didn't love him. So I wasn't sad or upset, just amused. What hurt the most was not having asked for a divorce sooner, not telling my mom the truth sooner. That way my mom wouldn't have heard from Ethan that he didn't love me. I imagined how heartbroken she must have been when Ethan said that to her this morning. The treasure she held so dear, discarded so easily. Mom cried and I cried, but Mom comforted me through her tears. It's okay, Jess, you're such a good person. You'll meet someone better in the future, and Ethan will regret it. I nodded, smiling. But deep down, I knew Ethan wouldn't regret it, and I wouldn't have a future. Ethan was probably worried about money, dragging his feet on the divorce. I sent him several messages, but he either said he was busy or didn't respond at all. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and told his parents about the divorce. They exploded. We've turned a blind eye to the thing with Mia, but you need to be more careful. You can't let Jess reach her breaking point. If she makes this public, people will sympathize with her because of her single parent status and her muteness. It will affect your reputation and the company's stock price. You must apologize to Jess immediately, no matter what. You cannot divorce. After scolding Ethan, they turned to me and played the emotional card. They brought gifts to the hospital to show how much they liked me. If Ethan did anything wrong, we'll scold him and make sure he fixes it. Jess, you can't just get angry and talk about divorce, saying that only hurts a relationship. Relationship? What relationship do I have with that fool Ethan? Just then, Ethan entered the room and heard my thoughts clearly. He scowled. I looked innocent, silently thinking, super fool. No matter how much I insulted him, only he could hear me. To his parents, I was always the wronged one. Ethan couldn't say anything, so he just called me outside. He said, I can agree to anything except divorce. Would you agree if I kept a man outside? Jess, just divorce me now. At least let me have peace before I die. Do you really hate me that much? I didn't expect him to ask that, but his expression was serious. He said, Jess, let's try again, okay? I suspected Ethan had been driven crazy by his parents. How else could he say such ridiculous things? Had we even started? If not, how could we try again? I replied seriously, word by word, Ethan. I've never liked you. Even from the beginning, I just wanted to live a good life. It had nothing to do with love. While I still want a peaceful separation, let's go get the divorce papers. If this drags on, I'll sue for divorce, no matter how ugly it gets. I wouldn't be the only one embarrassed. Ethan scoffed, biting his teeth. Jess, I really underestimated you. As Ethan got angrier, the nurse suddenly ran in, urgently calling me. Jess? I looked up, meeting her anxious gaze, and an uneasy feeling settled in my heart. The nurse urged me to return to the ward quickly. Your mom, it's bad, she's asking for you. I felt like thunder had struck, buzzing in my ears. Luckily, the nurse supported me and helped me get back to the room quickly. Doctors and nurses had gathered in a circle, looking grim. Ethan's parents were also there, looking worried. His mom tried to comfort me. Jess, don't worry. We're getting the best doctor. Your mom will be fine. She won't. We were rich enough to afford any medicine, to hire the best doctors. But some things can't be bought. After a series of tests, the doctor turned back and shook his head helplessly. At that moment, I felt my heart break. As the doctors and nurses dispersed, I saw my mom reaching out for me. I instinctively walked up, trembling as I took her hand. Jess, my mom's voice was faint. Mom is leaving. Don't cry. I wanted to obey her, to let her go in peace, but my tears flowed uncontrollably. Mom lifted her other hand to wipe my tears, but it was too weak, and it fell again. Jess, don't cry! I nodded furiously, opening my mouth to speak. I remembered that when I was a child, I could make sounds. If I could call out to her now, would it reduce some of the regret? But I couldn't make a sound, no matter how wide I opened my mouth. No sound came out until Ethan stepped forward and gently told Mom. Jess wants to call you Mom. In her dimming eyes, a faint light flickered. She smiled and nodded at me. I heard you. Then she signaled everyone else to leave, leaving just me and Ethan. I thought she was going to tell him to take care of me, but instead she grabbed his hand and almost pleadingly whispered, Can you agree to divorce Jess? Ethan froze, looking at me. I suddenly stopped crying, pressing my hand to my chest. It hurt so much, as if something inside had finally shattered. Before, Mom had worried that after her death, no one would care for me. So she wanted someone to look after me. Now she was worried I'd be mistreated after her death. No one would care for me. So she begged Ethan to set me free. Will you agree to divorce Jess? Ethan, either unable to refuse her dying wish or touched by his conscience, finally agreed. Mom let out a relieved sigh, patting my head. Jess, be yourself. And be happy. Okay, Mom is going to find Dad now. You come later. Be our daughter in the next life. Okay, Jess. In the last moment, I held her in my arms. She passed away in my arms. I held her hand, feeling her life slip away. Mom, I may not be obedient this last time. I'm coming to find you and Dad soon. When I woke up, I found myself in the hospital room. Ethan was sitting by my bed. I didn't know how much time had passed, but a stubble had already appeared on his chin. Seeing me stir under the covers, Ethan quickly said, I've already made arrangements for your mom's funeral. Don't worry. Leave. The one sharp word left Ethan stunned. He suppressed his temper, saying, Jess, I promised your mom I'd divorce you. Can you at least stop hating me so much? I can't stop hating you unless you die. Ethan, with no progress in the conversation, he stood up and went outside for a cigarette to calm down. When he came back, he saw me quickly typing something on my phone. Ethan? Ever sharp, he immediately sensed something was wrong and reached over to snatch the phone out of my hands. When he saw what I had typed, his eyes widened. Jess, do you really have to go this far? I've told you before. If you won't divorce me, I don't mind making this public. I was ready to send a divorce statement. I didn't care whether it affected your reputation or Reynolds Group's stock price. I was going to die anyway. Why should I care about others? Ethan stared at me for a long time, seeing no sign of retreat. Finally, he sighed in resignation. Selena, I've already promised your mom I'll divorce you. Don't mention my mom. If you hadn't gone to the hospital and said you didn't like me, she wouldn't have been so hurt and passed away so quickly. Ethan froze for a moment, explaining, I didn't say that. I went to the hospital to check on your condition. I thought since I was already there, I might as well see your mom. But I knew it wasn't Ethan's words, but my mom's sharpness that made her realize the truth from his actions. Ethan apologized. It's my fault. I should have told you first. If I had, at least we would have been prepared and many things could have been smoothed over. My mom wouldn't have been led to those conclusions. I was full of resentment, but when I thought about it, I realized I had no one to blame but myself. If I had spoken up sooner about not liking Ethan, if I hadn't held back on our wedding day, so many if-onlys, I was so tired. The Reynolds family originally planned to hold a large funeral for my mom, but later, I requested a simpler one. After the burial, I moved back to my own place. Gossip media followed Ethan around, and several times they caught him downstairs at my apartment, but he never came inside, naturally. Rumors spread that our two families had fallen out and that Ethan and I were about to divorce. This news led to a drop in Reynolds Group's stock price. Ethan's parents came to see me, hoping I would move back in. Jess, you need to think about us too. To be honest, Ethan hasn't done anything wrong to you. If our family falls apart, what good does it do you? Why make such a scene? It's Mom. Ethan hurried over and interrupted his mother's words. You two go back. His parents were not pleased. Standing stiffly with cold expressions, Ethan turned back to glance at me. He saw me sitting there, motionless. There was no sound in my heart either. Suddenly, he seemed to grow anxious. He stepped forward and asked, Jess, would you like to go for a walk with me? Since moving back, I hadn't left the house for more than half a month. In this large house, I was all alone. I couldn't speak, and no one spoke to me. I let myself sink further and further into this silent world, deeper and deeper. Ethan didn't pay attention to his parents. He took me outside. After getting into the car, he asked, Is there anywhere you want to go? I looked out at the bright sunshine, so intense. It felt like the blood that had almost died within me suddenly came alive again. I spoke in my heart. I want to go to the mall. Ethan nodded. He knew I probably didn't feel like shopping, but he still followed my request. I bought a bright red dress and had the sales associate do my makeup. Ethan gradually realized what I was doing. I wanted to look my best to present myself in the best light to see my parents. When we arrived at the cemetery, the sunset was perfect. The vibrant twilight cast a golden hue over the tombstones. I stood in front of the grave, holding the hem of my dress, and twirled gently. At the same time, I asked in my heart, Mom, Dad, do I look good today? Does it remind you of the time when I was little and you were both still here and I wore a red dress? If I come to see you like this, will you recognize me? Living alone is so exhausting. I miss you so much. Ethan stood behind me, and every word I spoke in my heart he could hear. I didn't mind that he heard it. At this point, I really didn't care about anything anymore. But Ethan didn't want me to be indifferent. He stepped forward and embraced me from behind. His hoarse voice seemed to be struggling with something. Jess, there's news from the hospital. They found a suitable match. Once you have the transplant, you can live a long, healthy life. There's no need. But didn't you say you didn't want to become a ghost of the Reynolds family after you die? I've arranged for the surgery to be a month from now. We'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to finalize the divorce first. Then you can have the surgery. When you wake up, you'll have the divorce certificate in hand. That offer was tempting. At least, before my mom died, I would have agreed without hesitation. But now, I didn't want to continue living at all. The physical pain was something I could endure, but the pain in my heart seemed like it would swallow everything. Ethan, I'm tired. Then please, will you agree to the surgery? I shook my head. Suddenly, cold liquid dripped onto my neck. And then Ethan's voice became even hoarser. Your parents would want you to live well. Do it for them, not for me, okay? We can go to the Civil Affairs Bureau first. Then you can go into the operating room. Jess, okay. The day we went to get the divorce certificate, Ethan looked in a good mood. He wore a brand new suit with his shirt collar perfectly stiff. He looked down at the little book in his hand, then lifted his head to say, I'll take you to the hospital. I shook my head, but he insisted on taking me. It's a deal that after we get the divorce certificate, you'll go straight to the operating room. If I don't see it with my own eyes, what if you run away halfway? I didn't respond. For some reason, I had a strange feeling today. Even though Ethan seemed to be at ease, there was a heavy aura around him. When we arrived at the hospital, everything was ready. Ethan followed me to the door of the operating room. Before I went in, he leaned in and said, Jess, don't be afraid. Everything will be okay. I wasn't afraid at all. In fact, he seemed to be the one more afraid. Maybe Marcus's words that early morning had woken him up. Maybe after all this time, he had developed feelings, but it was too late. It was all too late. The surgery was a success. Before I was discharged, a lawyer from Reynolds Group came to see me and asked me to sign some papers. It was the compensation Ethan had voluntarily offered after our divorce. When converted, it was almost half of the money my family had originally invested. The lawyer said it was the biggest compensation Ethan could offer within his means. Ethan didn't show up. For a long time after, he neither appeared in front of me nor in the public eye. Even Ethan's parents became much more low-key. When the gossip media directly asked about Ethan, they avoided the topic. I transferred all the family assets into an account balance. Then, I left. The weather that day was terrible, with rain falling nonstop. I stood by the glass wall at the airport, watching the rain fall outside. Suddenly, I saw a familiar figure in the reflection. But when I turned to look, the crowd passing by was made up of strangers. They hurried along, all chasing after a better life. None of them had time to look back at the road they had come. 2 years later, during the Chinese New Year, Ethan, who hadn't been seen for a long time, posted an update on his social media. Happy New Year. The accompanying photo showed an airport background. But in the photo, there was no one else except the reflection in the glass. It seemed like no one knew who he was wishing a Happy New Year to, and yet, it seemed like everyone knew. The post received many likes, but no comments. After Ethan posted the update, he was about to put down his phone when suddenly, a strange call came in. The number was from abroad. When he answered, there was a long silence on the other end. Then, a voice finally came through, soft and sweet like the sound of heaven. Happy New Year. It wasn't a voice in his head, it was a real clear voice. Ethan didn't respond, and the call ended soon after, but that day became the happiest New Year of Ethan's life. She said, Happy New Year, Jess. May you be happy too.